I'm Max Harris and I'm co-chair of JustSpeak.
Are Maori overrepresented in the criminal justice system?
I think JustSpeak would say yes, definitely. You can see that in all of the statistics, which we probably know about, the number of Maori in prison compared to the number of Maori in the general population, the number of Maori that get parole, number of Maori that receive more serious sentences, or the number of Maori that get bail. We all know the statistics which show, unfortunately, that they come out worse off relative to population compared to other groups in New Zealand.
Why do you think Maori are overrepresented?
I think it's a really complex question, but I think there are some clear answers as well. I think, first of all, there is a lot of stereotyping around Māori and a lot of strong associations between Māori and crime in New Zealand. And what that means is when there is the use of discretion in our justice system by police or by judges or by other officials that have power in our justice system, that discretion is often exercised less favourably towards Māori because there is this association between Māori, unfortunately, and offending, this perception, and so that means that where there's that discretion, that room to move, Māori don't get the benefit of the doubt. So that stereotyping, I think, is a big deal. But more than that, and taking a longer term view, I think that comes from history of colonisation, which has affected Māori today. So displacement of Māori from rural areas to urban areas, dislocation of Māori from their culture, removal of language, all of which has meant that Māori are disproportionately represented in lower socioeconomic brackets, and mean that hardship is passed down generations. We talk a lot about how sometimes things like sayings can be passed down from your parents, but I think on a more negative level, cycles of offending and cycles of behaviour can also be passed down, and that's happened from the history of colonisation by Pākehā in New Zealand. So yeah, I think discretion and kind of history of colonisation would be the main reasons, I think, and I think those are factors that people like Moana Jackson have really examined closely and really well.
What issues might arise from this overrepresentation?
I think even though the overrepresentation comes from stereotyping, it also has the potential to worsen the stereotyping. So that would be a major issue that I think we need to be aware of, this constant linkage between Māori and crime. And Moana Jackson also talks about this, how we have a particular view about Māori being associated with child abuse, and we know the names of the Kāhui twins or Nia Glassy, and yet we don't know the names of a lot of instances of child abuse that have occurred by Pākehā, and I think that's because we have this stereotyping that comes from overrepresentation. I think also there is this danger that Māori as a group will feel like they have a less secure place within New Zealand culture and New Zealand society, and when a proportion of that group is represented tragically in these statistics, I think that does undermine the self-esteem of a lot of Māori who fear being seen in particular ways. So I think we need to be really alert to that about the place of Māori in New Zealand.
Does gender make a difference? Are there more female Māori offenders than male?
I think it depends on how you look at the statistics, but it's certainly true that there are special issues facing Māori women, and I think the statistics for Māori women in prison have been particularly high and have changed significantly in recent years. So I know that Moana Jackson has said that since writing his major report 20 years ago, one of the most surprising changes has actually been the number of Māori women that have increased in numbers in prison. the rates for Māori men have been unfortunately as high as in the late 80s, but the numbers of Māori women in prison have rocketed up. And I think there are complex issues around intersectionality there, around how there can be a double impact of sexism and racism on Māori women. Again, that's something that quite a few scholars have looked at in quite a lot of depth, but it's an issue that I don't think we are alert to, or policymakers are alert to enough.
What might we do as a nation to reduce these statistics?
Well, in JustSpeak's report on Māori in the criminal justice system, we talked about 4 steps we might take as a nation to reduce those statistics or make a dent in them. And they related to legal changes, media changes, policy changes, and community changes. On the legal front, we said there are a number of provisions in our laws at the moment that might be helpfully used to reduce imprisonment rates for Māori. Like there's a provision in the Sentencing Act, Section 8I, which allows for cultural factors to be taken into account. The problem is these provisions haven't been looked at by lawyers or judges, and so what we were saying was it's time to kind of awaken these sleeping giants and make sure they're used, and they could be a really positive tool for reducing time that Māori spend in prison. So that was the legal front. On the media front, we see a major problem as being negative media reporting of Māori issues in the criminal justice system. We said we need more positive success stories being showcased. There are some good examples in rural papers of success stories being highlighted around Māori focus units in prisons or Māori rehabilitation programs. We said we need more of that. And one way you might do that is by having a competition for journalism students, which rewards the most interesting success story. Or another way might be to engage with media groups to achieve that. On the policy front, we suggested a Māori lens for policy, which would make sure that every policy gets screened for the impact it might have on Māori. We have that kind of screening mechanism in other areas, like we have a regulatory impact assessment which looks at economic implications of a decision, but we don't at the moment look at the disproportionate impact a decision might have on Māori. And that's a real shame when, for instance, recent bail changes have been shown to likely have more of an impact on Māori, and yet that hasn't been recognised because there's no tool of that kind before the policy is announced and formulated. Lastly, we talked about, on the community front, an idea we called conversational activism. And what we meant by that is real change happens when people are talking to people they know and people they respect. And we want more conversations about the state of Māori in the criminal justice system in New Zealand, why Māori are overrepresented, but also how we can change that. We think that minds can be changed on issues like gay marriage through these personal conversations, personal encounters, and we think that also applies to Māori in the criminal justice system. So, long answer, but we suggest, and I believe, we need changes on all those fronts, law and policy, but also in the media and in the community. And only with all of those changes might we be able to tackle this really serious challenge.